This is a VPI HR-X turntable. It's built sometime in like early 2000s, around 2005 or 2006. And when it came out, this turntable with the controller was around $10,000. Nowadays, in 2025, these come up for sale for a little less than half of that typically, all depending on the condition. And now that they're approaching about 20 years old, a couple things are starting to happen. Obviously, the prices are coming down to what I consider to be more reasonable. And also, these are getting to the point where the lubricants are starting to fail. And I'll go through that a little bit once I take this back apart before I move it into my listening space. There's no good videos that I've seen that go over how this is actually constructed. I've seen some old articles and reviews from when this was new. And I'm gonna go through like a somewhat technical approach to explain what makes this turntable so special. VPI is a really cool company. They're based out of New Jersey. And while I was working on this, I found a couple other neat things you wouldn't expect to see outside of America. For example, the motors are American motors. Everything is built for 60 hertz. Obviously, the synchronous drive system is set at 60 hertz. If this was from Japan, I'd expect to see more, 50 hertz type of equipment, or really anywhere in Europe for that matter. It's built relatively simple, although it's very imposing. Size-wise, the thing weighs like 100 pounds, and it takes up nearly my entire bench. But what I like about it is there's really not many parts. You have a spindle that comes through the center platter, a weight, which is this spinning part right here, which has a simple spindle and a bearing. And the tone arm is a unipivot and has a lot of adjustment capabilities, but it's not overly complex. There's no bearings to wear out. There's no lash you have to worry about when setting it up, the bearings that is. And there are some interesting quirks you have to be aware of, but rebuilding a tone arm like this is about as straightforward as you can get. That's really nice, especially after working on some of the other tone arms I've been restoring. This is kind of refreshing. The feet for this tone arm originally came with air bladders. This is what originally came with the turntable. It's a Firestone air bladder, Schrader valve up on top, and the Schrader valve would come through this foot, and then the base of the foot would rest on the bottom of the bladder, and you would adjust the pressure to give you dampening. This is a really complex approach to solving a simple problem. And VPI, I think, realized this later on in production, and they offered and still offer a conversion kit with, of all things, I think racquetballs, and I'll have a video about that. The racquetballs actually sit inside of this foot, and then the base holds the racquetball, and the racquetball has foam around the sides and the top. It's a really crude approach to solving some suspension, and it works. There's no springs to wear out. Obviously, racquetballs don't really wear out. Each one's holding up about 40 pounds worth of weight, and it's spread across the entire diameter of it. So the ones I took out of here were still round. I just cleaned them up, replace the foam and put them back in. What I really like about this turntable is, like I said, the simplicity. Now, it is imposing. There's a lot going on. It's really overly built, but the theory of the design is solid. The bearing is a ground rod supported in the bottom of the plinth, and there's a bearing pressed into the top. From what I could tell, that's a super hard stainless bearing that is pressed in there. It interfaces with a oil-light type material bronze bearing, bushing if you will, that passes all the way up through the platter, and it rests on something that I think is like a ceramic, but no ball bearings to worry about, just oil-light bronze or brass, and a ground rod with the pressed in bearing on the top for the thrust. And on the motor, much of the same. A ground rod. When I say ground rod, it's a piece of steel that's been ground to be a really specific outside diameter, and it's very hard. You could tell by the way the wear marks have occurred on the material itself. And just like the main platter, this weight, which is hilariously heavy, is a bronze material or a brass oil-light with a pressed in, what I'm again guessing is like a ceramic seat for the ball bearing. This weight is pretty heavy. I'm glad I didn't drop it. Now these motors sit inside of a housing which is all aluminum with some clearances cut out of the bottom for the wires, the IEC connector, and the servo motors. Not servo motors, but synchronous motors. The motors are wired in parallel, and they are 115 volt rated. In theory, you could plug this right into a wall, and I think it would operate just fine. I'm not going to try that. Maybe I will, but right now I'm not going to. There's a reason why VPI wanted this to run at 72 volts, even though each motor is rated at 115. Maybe they found the starting torque wasn't necessary at the higher voltage, or maybe the extra voltage imparted more harmonics or vibration into the motors. I don't know. But again, talk about being future-proof. Everything here is replaceable with rather generic parts. I'm going to service this VPI JMW Memorial tone arm. This model is a 12.6, and it's part of my HR-X that I'm servicing today. I have this all lubricated, and now I'm just exercising it for a while to get everything moving. And the next step of this process is cleaning up this tone arm. It's a textbook example of old lubricants breaking down. At one time this was like a thick grease, and at this point it's more like a sticky paste. And as I was trying to adjust this, this right up here, this knob is really stiff, and it almost feels not crunchy, but it doesn't feel smooth. And when you look down the barrel, you'll see that grease has really, it's just broken down over time. The right way to service a piece of equipment like this is to take it completely apart and get all the old stuff out and re-lubricate with new material. And that's exactly what I plan to do. This is my first VPI tone arm, and I've always been a little leery about unipivots. And what unipivot basically means is the tone arm rests on one point, that little spear sticking up. There's a reservoir of thick fluid, like a dampening fluid, and this concave portion here basically sits on that point, and now the tone arm can move in 360 degrees up and down, left to right. It can also pivot in this direction, which is not normal for most tone arms. A tone arm with like a regular gimbal can only move up and down and left and right. But in this case, you also have this yaw motion as well. The yaw is controlled by rotating this rear mass, and the weight on the cartridge is also adjusted by sliding this in and out. From what I could tell, the little thumb screw on the back is a rather crude way of fine-tuning the weight. Like you would get it real close by getting this to the point where your VTA is as good as you can get, and then moving this little thumb wheel in and out is a way to fine-tune it. One really cool part about this tone arm is the way the wires come out the top. I think that's kind of nice. It makes switching tone arms and cartridges really easy. In fact, the guy I got this from has like a suitcase full of tone arms, and apparently he switched between them with different cartridges. Another nice feature about this tone arm is this dial here. This is for the up and down motion of the entire tone arm. So as you change cartridges or make adjustments, this is about as quick as you could possibly make the up and down motion for the base of the tone arm. It's a neat design. I've never taken one of these apart, but I'm going to make some pretty general assumptions about how it's put together. It seems like everything is just threaded screws. Here's another example of maintenance. It's all really nicely machined. It's already been 20 years. It's hard to believe. This turntable probably came out in the mid-2000s, and that means this grease is already 20 years old. So at the time of this video, it's 2025, and although it doesn't seem like it, 2005 was 20 years ago. And this is also indicative of old fluids and greases. They tend to discolor everything that they come in contact with. It's like the pigment in the lubrication comes out and gets all over everywhere. Here's some of that sticky grease. Oh man, I shouldn't have touched it. Speaking of sticky grease, inside this little reservoir is a high viscosity fluid. And the purpose of it is to basically dampen the tone arm. If it wasn't for this like thick fluid, the tone arm would dance all over the place. This is like a shock absorber that keeps the tone arm from bouncing around too much. And I have some of that fluid that I'll use for that purpose. I have new O-rings. I'm kind of surprised how much everything is putting up a fight. Also, another thing that's starting to show its age is this rest. The foam is turning into a powder. And that's pretty common after this many years. It tends to break down and it turns into like a black dust. And it just makes a mess. It doesn't look nice. And we're going to take off that arm, take that apart. Might even re-oil that queuing mechanism, depending on how it's built. If I could just find my little screwdriver. Should be anywhere. Let's see if this guy will fit. There we go. I'm going to put this little screw back in here so I don't lose it. Yeah, that's due for replacement. Yep. Oh, okay. So these holes go all the way through the bottom, and they are what guides the tone arm up and down on that adjustment. Let's pull this queuing lever out. Another set screw that pops out. This is like a locking thumb screw. And now here is the steady rest. I'm going to leave this together. There is a Allen key here that locks this barrel. And if I had a spanner, I would undo this. You know what? I do. Maybe I will. We'll see. Now, when it comes to this piece, I don't know how this is built, but if it's like anything else, it should be pretty straightforward. Let's give it a shot. First thing is first, let's put some parts away so I don't lose them. Thumb screw. I'm going to start on the top here, because you know I can't pull this down because this is here. I probably got to take these out the bottom. I wonder if I should make a witness mark. No, it can only go back in one way. So, you know what? I'm going to make the smallest mark. I can always clean this off if I need to, but I'm going to use this mark right here. There we are. That's just so I remember the orientation in case something happens that I'm not expecting. Keep in mind I still have all that fluid in here, but it's so viscous, it doesn't want to go anywhere. These first one was really loose. Put up a little fight. Same there. Same there. It seems like, and I'm not surprised, since this is built in New Jersey, it's all American thread. Here we go again with an O-ring and some of that old grease. And I'm glad I made that witness mark, because aside from this set screw right here where my thumb is, this could slide in and end up anywhere. So I'm going to make a much more visible alignment mark right here. And this is on the bottom. I have one here, one here. There it is. This is greased as well, which is really nice. That's a nice way of adjusting like the center point of the pivot on the tone arm. I'm not sure how often you actually have to adjust something like that. I've never had to once it's set the first time. But just a good example of good quality machining and a nice approach where instead of just having metal on metal friction against that face, they actually put an O-ring, which when greased with new lubricants is really superior. All right. There's really nothing here to take apart. These pins and this barrel must be pressed into place. I'm going to leave those and just clean them out with isopropyl alcohol. And the last thing to work on is the tone arm, which is not much to do. Aside from checking continuity on the wires, which I was told by the previous owner this worked okay, but I'll check that. Here's the whole disassembly of the tone arm. That's all there is to it. The weight has like a neoprene plastic guide inside. That's nice. And the set screw actually comes through it. So the set screw actually rests on the aluminum itself. This is kind of a neat design. One thing I just immediately realized is if you set this up on a flat surface and you say I put some lubrication on this barrel, you could find the natural center point for that weight, and it should get really close to where it should be to keep everything perpendicular. I might try that. I might even put some graduations on the back, like some lines to use as a reference. This way I could always come back to where the center point was if I set this on a flat surface. There's nothing to take apart here. This is a really nice connector. It's almost like a baby amphenol connector. Really nice assembly. This would normally come off and then the grip would come out. No need to do that though. Supposedly this one works and I just want to leave it like it is. It looks like the wire might be nicked a little tiny bit right here. I'll go around and just visually verify everything, including the strain relief up in the top. Looks to be pretty good, even though this tone arm is very dirty. That Allen key is actually what screws into that concave area. I'm not going to adjust it, making an assumption that it is factory set. And all that would do is just change where this is in relation to the base of the tone arm. And up on this end, it just really needs cleaned. This dirt, this was all over the whole table. It's like, I'm not sure. The house that this came out of was really clean and nice. I just wonder if maybe before that, it didn't live in the nicest environment. Or maybe it's just, 20 years old and sitting out in the environment of a house. That's what happens. And I'm going to flip this upside down, dump out all that fluid, and get some new stuff inside. Okay, cool. That's a 12.6 JMW tone arm by VPI.